Hey guys, it's me Jack and I'm back with another review. Today I will finally be taking a look at the final installment of the Indiana Jones franchise, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. For years there were talks about Harrison Ford doing a fifth Indiana Jones movie, and eventually one was announced. It was not to be directed by Steven Spielberg, but this time James Mangold. And I thought, okay, that's promising. James Mangold had previously directed Logan, which was also the final movie of an iconic hero, in that case Wolverine. After the film's showing at the Cannes Film Festival, however, my excitement declined somewhat due to the mixed reaction. But I still kept an open mind going in. Did it deliver? Well, let's find out. In this movie, Indy is joined by his goddaughter, Helena Shaw, and the two of them are on a mission to find an artifact that can take you back in time. But a Nazi scientist named Jürgen Voller is also after it. One of my big worries going into this movie was how old Harrison Ford is. I wasn't sure how well he was going to do as Indy in this movie. And in a lot of ways, I think he's still great. In other areas, not so much. When it comes to his performance in this movie, it is excellent. I would go as far as to say that this is his best performance in the franchise. He really comes off as a broken, lost man, due to the fact that his son died in the war, and the pain caused from his loss put an end to his marriage to Marion. The scene where he tells Helena about this is honestly the best bit of acting from Harrison Ford in the entire franchise, in my opinion. However, I am noticing a pattern with these new sequels to franchises starring Harrison Ford. They all portray him as a depressed old man who has lost a family member in one way or another. In The Force Awakens, his son turned evil, and so he and his wife broke up. In Blade Runner 2049, his wife is dead, and he had to abandon his daughter to protect her. And it's very similar in this film. Still, I like that this movie explores the idea of age, and not just pointing out that Indy himself is old, but also that his interests are old, at least to the new generation. We have a scene of Indy giving a lecture, and most of the class isn't really that interested. What they are interested in are the astronauts who have landed on the moon. The one major issue with Harrison Ford in this movie, however, is the fact that because he's so old now, he can't really do any physical fights, which is a real shame. One of the great things about Indiana Jones as a character was his ability to hold his own in a fight, despite often getting the shit beat out of him. In all the previous movies, there's a scene where Indy has a fight with one of the secondary villains. In Raiders, he fights the Nazi mechanic. In Temple of Doom, he fights the Thuggee. In Last Crusade, he fights Colonel Vogel. And in Crystal Skull, he fights the Russian colonel. In this film, we don't really get any scene like that, and that is very disappointing. Then there's the character of Helena Shaw, Indy's goddaughter. Her character has garnered a lot of criticism, and it's not really unwarranted. What sucks is that there is a good character somewhere in here. There are some interesting layers to her character, but they aren't really brought out. Her father was a friend of Indy's who was obsessed with the Dial of Archimedes. This obsession made him go crazy. There's a scene where she mentions to Indy how he should have been there after her father died, but it's treated more as her just teasing him than a genuine emotional moment. It would have been so great to have a scene where she gets emotional and angrily tells Indy that he should have been there for her. But we never really get anything like that. Instead, she just spends most of the movie wisecracking. It also doesn't help that her character does some really shitty things in the movie. Like after she first meets Indy, she basically just abandons him and leaves him to die. Or later in the movie, after Indy's friend, played by Antonio Banderas, is killed, she continues just making jokes. And Indy himself expresses frustration over this. Like, show a little respect. And then there's the ending, where they go back in time to the Battle of Syracuse. and Indy decides that he wants to stay. Now, at first, I didn't really like this. It seemed out of character. But the more I thought about it, Indy has always been somebody who is obsessed with the past, obsessed with history. And now here he is experiencing one of history's great battles. And he's already lost his son and his wife. So yeah, it does kind of make sense that he would be tempted to stay. And yes, there's the fact that he could easily screw up the future events of history, but he's so overcome with emotion here. So I understand why he wouldn't be thinking logically here. And honestly, I think that on paper this is a perfect climax for the last film in this franchise. Indy being tempted to become part of history itself. But the problem is that when Helena thinks that she can't get through to Indy with her words, she just punches him and knocks him out. And it's just so unintentionally funny, and kills any sense of drama that the scene had going for it. The scene would have worked so much better if she just told him that there are people back home who love him and will miss him, and that there is still a place for him. And Indy finally comes to his senses and goes back. Admittedly, the following scene where Indy is reunited with Marion is really nice. But still, this climax was so close to being great. There's the character of Teddy, Helena's sidekick, who is basically just a knockoff Short Round. Right down to him having basically the exact same backstory, with him meeting Helena for the first time when he tried to steal from her. It honestly makes me wonder why they didn't just bring back Short Round for this movie. Considering this is Indiana Jones' last adventure, it would make sense that he would share that adventure with one of the characters that we know and love from the previous films, like Short Round or Sallah. Yes, Sallah is in this movie, but not that much. He goes with Indy to the airport and asks him if he could come with him, because he misses their adventures. But Indy says no, and we don't see Sallah again until the very end. If this is the last time that we're going to be seeing this character, we should make the most of it. The villain of the movie is Jürgen Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen. And I have to say, he's a pretty solid villain. I mean, obviously Mads Mikkelsen is fantastic. He has a great presence to him, and a truly iconic voice. There's this great scene where he sort of passive-aggressively insults this black man in New York, and it really makes you hate the guy. On top of that, his motivation is pretty interesting. He wants to use Archimedes' dial to go back in time and kill Hitler, so that he can correct all of Hitler's mistakes and win the war. I love how the movie shows that the beliefs of the Nazis extend beyond even Hitler himself. Though if there's one issue I have with his character, it's his death. It is really underwhelming, especially by Indiana Jones standards. Look back on the deaths of the villains in the previous movies. Belloc's head explodes. Mola Ram is eaten by crocodiles. Donovan turns into a skeleton, and Spalko gets burned away to nothing. Meanwhile, Voller just crashes his plane. I mean, yeah, he's burned, but that's still pretty tame compared to the previous villains. One of my biggest issues with the movie is the fact that they killed off Mutt. It just felt like an attempt to appease the people who were disappointed with Crystal Skull. And I know that Shia LaBeouf's career and reputation has gone down the toilet, but if that's the case, why not just recast Mutt? It just undermines the ending of Crystal Skull. Indy and Marion finally get married, they have a son, and now they're one big happy family. Until Mutt dies in war, and then they divorce. I like the idea of Indy recovering from the loss of a loved one, but I feel like they should have reversed the roles and had Marion be the one who died in between movies. Maybe Mutt is now married with kids of his own. He wants Indy to spend quality time with his grandchildren while he still can. But Indy is still devastated by the death of his wife, and he doesn't want his grandchildren to have to see him in so much pain. Then, after Indy nearly dies going on his adventure, he is reminded of the value of his life, and how he has to make the most of the time he has left. and the movie ends with him finally visiting his grandchildren. Maybe he even puts his hat on one of them, suggesting that they could continue his legacy in the future. I feel like that would have worked better, and would have felt like more of a natural continuation of the previous film, and less like Damage Control. The action in the movie is mostly good. The opening, set during World War II, is pretty fun. It feels like a classic indie adventure, with an entertaining fight on top of a train. There is one obvious issue with this sequence, though, and it's the de-aged Indy. It just doesn't look right. And frankly, I'm not sure that de-aging will ever truly work. All I know is that it doesn't really work here. Also, there's this one shot of Indy running on top of the train that looks like absolute ass. The CGI is inexcusably bad here. The way he runs doesn't look natural at all. The chase scene where Indy is riding on a horse is pretty exciting. The way that he rides it down into the subway tunnel, escaping from an oncoming train, it's thrilling stuff. As is the chase scene in Tangiers. My favorite, though, would have to be the climax, where they go back to the Battle of Syracuse, and end up getting involved. It's chaotic in all the right ways. However, I do think it would have been interesting if Voller had successfully gone back to 1939, and the climax of the movie is Indy has to save Hitler. Not because he's a good guy, obviously, but because he knows that Voller could succeed where Hitler failed. It would have been an interesting way to bring Indy's conflict with the Nazis in this franchise full circle. John Williams once again returns to do the music, and it's decent. Yeah, that's the thing. As great as John Williams is at making music, his newer soundtracks aren't anywhere near as good as his old ones. And this one is no exception. The most memorable pieces of music in this film are just pieces of music from the previous films. Some of them do work, like the return of Marion's theme when she shows up, but then there are some that just feel unnecessary and are kind of distracting. Like during the chase scene in Tangiers, they play some of the boat chase music from Last Crusade, and now all I can think of is that scene. So ultimately, this movie has pros and it has cons, and all of it adds up to a movie that is okay. I do ultimately think that this is the weakest movie of the franchise, and that really is a shame, considering how great this franchise is. I'm going to give Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny a 6 out of 10.